John chapter 20, verses 1 to 18. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. So she came running to Simon, Peter, and the other disciple, the one Jesus loved, and said, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they put him." So Peter and the other disciple started for the tomb. Both were running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent over and looked in at the strips of linen lying there, but did not go in. Then Simon Peter came along behind him and went straight into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the cloth that had been wrapped around Jesus' head. The cloth was still lying in its place, separate from the linen. Finally, the other disciple who had reached the tomb first also went inside. He saw and believed. They still did not understand from the scripture that Jesus had risen from the dead. The disciples went back to where they were staying. Now Mary stood outside the tomb crying. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb and saw two angels in white, seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. They asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" "They have taken my Lord away," she said, "and I don't know where they put him." At this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she didn't realize it was Jesus.
He asked her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it you are looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned toward him and cried out in Aramaic, "Rabboni." Jesus said, "Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and to your God." Mary Magdalene went to the disciples with the news, "I have seen the Lord," and she told them that he had said these things to her. This is the word of the Lord.
Okay, this is where you're going to need your pieces of paper. Let's see them. Okay, good. Now, at Easter, we celebrate that Jesus, who we believe was a Son of God and who lived around 2,000 years ago, died on Good Friday, but rose again 3 days later. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that in this modern and scientific world, believing that somebody died and rose again is pretty difficult for many people to get their head around. So is the death and resurrection of Jesus unbelievable, or is the death and resurrection of Jesus unbelievably believable? See what I did there? So, well, to put this into context, there are a lot of things in this world that seem a bit unbelievable. And we read news headlines all the time, or we scroll through Instagram, and we have to work out whether what we're reading is possible or believable or impossible. And now each of you have your piece of paper, and on one side it says believable, and the other side it says unbelievable. I am going to read out a list of statements, and you need to decide whether you think that they are believable, in which case you'd hold it that way, or unbelievable, in which case you will hold up your piece of paper like that. Got it? Yes? Okay. So I'm going to say something, and you're going to decide whether it's believable and possible or unbelievable and impossible, and then hold up your sign. Are you with me? Thank you. Thank you this side, because you're with me. Okay, this is the first statement. A hippopotamus's jaw is wide enough to fit a sports car inside. Believable? Did you expect it to be a holy one? No, it's not holy. Believable, unbelievable. That's all unbelievable this side, apart from unbelievable. Unbelievable. Okay, There's a real mix. What about there at the back? Yeah, okay. All right, well, Google says it's possible. Just thought you might like to know. You can discuss that over lunch. Okay, number 2, are you ready? It's possible to pull an aeroplane along with just your hair. Oh, there's a few more believables. One person switched it to believable as soon as everybody else put a believable. Okay, unbelievable, believable. Okay, there's a few more believables. So, a Malaysian strongman set a new world record in 1990 by pulling a Boeing 747 aircraft nearly 60 feet using only his hair. I wonder what shampoo he uses. Okay. Here's number 3. Elephants can hear with their feet. Believable, unbelievable. Oh, many more believable ones apart from Julian. Okay, I'm not shaming you anyway. Okay, believable. Okay, good. I don't know how I do a sermon without Google, actually. Apparently, elephants pick up noises through their feet. So there we go. Okay, this is a slightly more tricky one. It's going to be really interesting to see what the responses are to this one. Number 4, aliens exist. Believable or unbelievable? Oh my goodness, I am surprised at this. Unbelievable. Okay, what are you thinking? Believable? Right. Well, there is no concrete evidence for aliens, but if we're talking about life or living things, then we haven't explored every corner of the universe or galaxy, so technically it's possible. I think that's right, isn't it? Anyone who knows this stuff better than me? Okay, this is a good one. Number 5, a chicken can live without its head for an hour. Oh, I'm amazed. You're all thinking, okay, we're thinking believable, are we? Okay, apparently that's more common than I thought. So, I'm not sure whether you're aware of this, but there was a chicken called Mike, and he was called Mike the Headless Chicken, and a farmer chopped off his head in 1945, and he survived. This is a bit gross. He survived, he's still alive today. He survived 18 months, okay, on just his nerve endings, and his farmer dropped, this is gross, dropped food and water directly into his esophagus. Oh, not good. Okay. Number 6, honey never expires or goes out of date. Believable or unbelievable? Honey never expires or goes out of date. We've got somebody who makes honey here, so I'd look at her. Okay, thank you. Yes, you're right. The oldest honey is 5,000 years old. Apparently it has a chemical composition that never makes it spoil. Unbelievable. Okay. Last one. Jesus existed as a historical figure. Believable, unbelievable? I mean, you're in church. There'd be quite a lot of pressure, really, wouldn't there? Not to put this one up. Okay, thank you so much. Actually, there's evidence from outside and inside the New Testament from other Jewish writers who had no skin in the game, as it were, that Jesus did exist. Now, all of these statements sounded pretty unbelievable, but there's evidence for some of them that they did actually happen or that they could happen. And often if we delve a bit more deeply into things, these things are more impossible than they first initially seem to be. Now, how do we decide whether something's possible and believable or impossible and unbelievable? The first thing I think you'd ask is, well, you listen to something and you think, well, is it possible? Is there any evidence for it? Then you might think, well, are there any eyewitnesses to this? And maybe, do other people think this is true? And are their opinions credible? At Easter, and actually all year round, we celebrate that Jesus died and rose again 3 days later, and that through his death, we have life and a relationship with our Creator. And that can sound pretty unbelievable. How would we test whether this claim was true or not? Well, first of all, we'd say, is there any evidence for the resurrection of Jesus? The answer is yes, plenty. There were lots of predictions in the scriptures that this would happen. There was an empty grave. There were folded grave clothes, which is fairly unexplainable for the time. And there were eyewitnesses, lots of eyewitness accounts of people seeing Jesus alive. And then do other people believe this? Well, yes. Actually, a belief in Jesus that exploded into a worldwide movement today where millions of people across the world can truly say that they have encountered the risen Jesus. So like many things in this world, the death and the resurrection of Jesus, when you look at the evidence, is unbelievably believable. And if you want to know more, you can come on an Alpha course in May and explore some of the evidence for yourself. Now, Chris is going to go into this in a bit more detail, and I have got the fun job of going out for an Easter egg hunt. So if you're a child, and it is only children, we are going to gather at the back, and I'm going to hand over to Chris.
Right, adults. Woo! I'm really sorry, everyone. I'm so sorry, adults. Some of you are looking pretty young. And so if you want to try and sneak in as a child, I will understand that that might be more entertaining. I hope that some of you have started on your Easter eggs already. So we're going to start thinking about this, about how the death and resurrection of Jesus are believably unbelievable. But we've only got the time it's going to take that horde of children to strip the area out there of Easter eggs. So I'm going to be brief. I'm not going to be able to go into as much detail as I might do on another occasion. And so I would really, really recommend Alpha. And it's really important to recognize, though, that this question about how believable the resurrection might be, it's not a new question. It's not a question that is unique to our modern scientific times. We can often think, can't we, that the people in the past, they were more superstitious than us. They were more gullible than us. They believed things that we wouldn't believe, but that just isn't the case. If we look at one of the really earliest bits of scripture we have, one of the earliest letters that was written, a letter which we think was written about 50 years after Jesus was around, 50 years, about 20 years after Jesus was around, in about 50 AD, we see that the people are already asking questions. People are already finding it difficult to believe the resurrection. In 1 Corinthians, if you look it up, if you have a Bible, Paul finds himself writing to try and prove, to try and show that the resurrection really happened. And at the heart of his defense of the truth of the resurrection, he points out why this is such an important question for everybody who believes in Jesus. He says, if Christ has not been raised, our preaching is useless, and so is your faith. So assuming what I'm doing here is not completely pointless, and any comments about the uselessness of my preaching can be made later, please. The question about whether the life and death and resurrection of Jesus is believable or not is a really good and important question for us to ask and to grapple with as those before us have grappled with, those people who've been grappling with it since the time of Jesus. So let's use those questions that Sarah left us with to think it through. Is there evidence? Were there eyewitnesses? Do other people think it's true, and are they credible? Well, as Sarah said, there is evidence that Jesus existed. Outside the Christian tradition, there are the Roman historians. You've got writing. Jesus appears in both Tacitus and Suetonius. They both refer to Jesus. And there's the Jewish historian, Josephus. He wrote this: there was, about this time, Jesus, a doer of wonderful works. And then he goes on in quite a bit of detail to talk about the crucifixion of Jesus and how people alleged that he rose from the dead. So there is some evidence to suggest that Jesus' existence is believable from outside of Scripture, but we've also got the testimony provided by the Bible itself. We have the accounts we've read today and others that are found in Scripture. And now I don't have a huge amount of time. I can already see quite a lot of the Easter eggs have gone, so I can't really go deeply into why we believe that Scripture is reliable, why we believe that it is consistent now, what we read and understand, with what was written back then, that people haven't done a job to change what was written. But if come on Alpha, we'll do that bit in detail. But for today, let's assume that Scripture is reliable, and we'll look at what we can find there. The testimony about Jesus' resurrection isn't anonymous. It gives us named eyewitnesses that people at the time could have gone and asked and said, is this true? Did you see it? And it gives also these little details which make it hard to have a different explanation for what happened on Easter Day. We've got those grave clothes, don't we? And it's kind of a strange thing to think about. But the grave clothes were the most valuable things in the graves. They were made of fine linen. They were really, really very expensive. So if somebody was going to rob the tomb, leave it bare and empty, the first thing you do is to take the grave clothes. That was where the money was. And even if you weren't going to rob it and you were just going to take the body, would you leave them neatly folded, or would you leave it in a bit of a mess? Because the account tells us, headcloth, beautifully folded. Then outside of those little details, we've got Jesus' own predictions. Jesus says time and time again he is going to die and rise again. And not only Jesus, but throughout the Old Testament, Jewish scriptures, thousands of years of predictions that point towards the Messiah, who we believe is Jesus, dying and rising again, all fulfilled through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. There's this evidence building up. So let's think a bit more about those eyewitnesses. It's really fair to say that Jesus chose really bad eyewitnesses, especially in that culture and time. In the culture and time, women like Mary Magdalene were not considered trustworthy witnesses in court. Their testimony would not have been accepted in the temple. So if Jesus was going to do this properly, probably what he could have done was turn up in front of those temple authorities that had just condemned him to death, being like, surprise, it hasn't gone how you expected. I am the Messiah. But he doesn't do that, because that's not really how Jesus works. Instead, Jesus chooses to turn up amongst the most unbelieved people and gives them the status as the first to see him resurrected. In some ways, for me, that makes it much more believable. Because if he turned up in front of the temple, there would be powerful people who were benefiting from saying that Jesus rose from the dead. Powerful people that might be making money out of it. They might be getting power and status. But we don't see that. Instead, we see the people who testify to Jesus rising from the dead as being some of the most vulnerable people, the people who had most to lose from challenging the powerful and those in authority. And he doesn't just appear to Mary and a few disciples. We think he appears to about 500 people in total. So this isn't a small group coming up with a big lie, but a lot of people giving the same account. And not just saying what they saw, but being punished and dying for saying it. The belief that Jesus was raised from the dead cost people their lives. And the followers of Jesus were persecuted time and time and time again for telling people that he rose from the dead. Let's take one person we have a lot of information of in the Bible, Paul, St. Paul. Now, he met Jesus much later, the risen Jesus much later on the road to Damascus. But before that, what was Paul involved with? Paul was involved in the persecution of Jesus' followers. The first mention of Paul, he is holding the coats for people who are stoning one of Jesus' disciples. So what would he have to gain? What would he have to gain from saying, I have met the risen Jesus. He has appeared to me. And now I'm going to give my life to telling everyone about him. Because his experience when he changed from being amongst the powerful to being amongst these people telling this awkward, unbelievable truth is that he gets ostracized from those that were around him. He gets imprisoned. He gets tortured. And it would eventually lead to his death. The eyewitnesses that we have of Jesus' resurrection have nothing to gain from claiming Jesus rose from the dead. And many suffered a great deal for doing so. For me, that makes them more believable than unbelievable. And so on to our last question. Do other people think it's true, and are they credible? Well, the Christian faith didn't finish with Paul, did it? Many other Christians believed his testimony and that of the other disciples, even in the face of persecution and torture. And that faith has passed down from generation to generation, millions of people around the world who believe what they've been told is believable, passed down to each and every one of us. And for many of those people, they themselves have had experiences of the truth of what Jesus said about himself, of what he said was going to happen, of God at work in their lives. There are people all around here who can testify to that. You should ask them when we're drinking Prosecco and eating food later. But there are not just people here. There are people around the world who are willing to be persecuted for believing in Jesus' life after death, even to this day. Because the question about the believability of the resurrection isn't just an academic one. It's not just one that we can do clever things and point to evidence about. It is that. But for some people of the world, in this world today, it means the difference between freedom and imprisonment, between life and death. It's an important thing to grapple with because it means such important, powerful things. But for me, the evidence of the Christian church throughout history, the witnesses that we have, the testimony and accounts we have of Jesus' life, that's why I find it that Jesus lived, died, and was resurrected unbelievably believable. But why does it matter here in Brentford in 2022, where we're safe, no one's being persecuted for believing in the resurrection? Well, back to what Paul said at the beginning. If Christ has not been raised, our preaching is useless, and so is your faith. For Paul, the resurrection is important because it tells us what our faith is like. Because if our faith finishes with an act of horrendous cruelty and death, if that's the end of Jesus' story, then it's a great story. It's an important story of sacrifice, but it ends in death. But with Jesus rising from the dead, our faith does not end with the death, but it ends with new life. That is the promise to all of us. That's the promise to all of us, the Easter hope, the celebration, the joy that we have today. That we are people who believe there is real, accessible, full life available to everybody. That's what the resurrection means. That's the life we see in Jesus' resurrected body. It's life that speaks of freedom, that speaks of victory over sin and death. It's life that gives each of us hope that there will be a time when there will be no more pain and destruction, when all the cruelty of the world will cease, and instead God will bring in a world that is marked by everlasting justice and peace. Our faith simply doesn't work without the resurrection being believable, without the resurrection being true. So it is really important to think about something so complex, so difficult, so unbelievable really carefully. And I'm sorry I haven't been able to do more detail now. I have no idea where we're up to with children returning. We're going to have a bit of unscheduled prayer. I think they're coming back. I can see them. But if you would like to find out more, do come on that Alpha course in May. We spend a whole week thinking about issues around the believability of the Christian faith. We go into much more detail about those different sources, about the trustworthiness of the Bible. It's a good place to start and to think and to learn. But for all of us, as the children come back in, the resurrection today means that fullness of life is available to us. It's available to each of us. We just have to believe in it.